Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this afternoon's Ambassadors Forum, which today features His Excellency Ambassador Olexander Motsyk. Mr. Motsyk has been the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States since 2010. I'm Klaus Lares, and I'm the Richard M. Krasno Distinguished Professor in History and International Affairs here at the University of North Carolina in sunny Chapel Hill. I would like to thank Richard Krasno and the generous sponsors behind the Krasno Distinguished Professorship for making possible this Ambassadors Forum. The Ambassadors Forum will bring to campus prominent and stimulating speakers and diplomats and politicians and leaders who will give public lectures and conduct seminars and workshops for our students. UNC community, in particular our graduate and undergraduate students, will thus have the opportunity to engage firsthand with international leaders and obtain insights into the practical application of their study of history, political science, economics, European studies, and international relations. I'm very grateful to our Center for European Studies, an EU Center of Excellence, for all the great help and support rendered for our Ambassadors Forum. John Stevens, the director, Erica Edwards, the executive director, and Phil and Mary, our camera team, deserve a special thank you. The videotaped talks and discussions in the framework of our Ambassadors Forum can be watched on our YouTube channel, and of course it's very exciting to watch them. And you can also see them via the websites of the UNC European Studies Center and the History Department. Today it is a great pleasure and honor to welcome Ambassador Motsyk to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Ambassador Olexander Motsyk is one of Ukraine's most senior diplomats. He is the second dignitary to visit UNC in conjunction with our Ambassadors Forum. Ambassador Motsyk joined the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1981. Over the years, Ambassador Motsyk has held many distinguished and important positions. For instance, he served as first Deputy Minister for European Integration. He also was the ambassador to Turkey and subsequently the Ukrainian ambassador to Poland. In 2010, he submitted his credentials to President Obama as Ukrainian ambassador to the United States. Mr. Motsyk has headed a number of Ukrainian delegations to the UN and other international organizations. He also was involved in negotiations with Russia, Romania, and Moldova. Not least, this is of course particularly important for universities such as UNC in Chapel Hill, not least Ambassador Motsyk has also published a large number of articles and essays on issues in international law and international relations. We are very pleased that the ambassador has joined us today in the context of our new Ambassadors Forum. He has already conducted a very fruitful and interesting seminar with our graduate students in the afternoon. The ambassador is accompanied by Stanislav Yesov, the counselor at the Embassy of Ukraine in Washington, D.C., and of course it is a great pleasure to welcome the counselor here as well. Ambassador Motsyk has kindly agreed to give a brief talk on Ukraine and global politics. He will enlighten us about Ukrainian relations with Russia, Europe, and the United States. We will then commence a roundtable discussion, and Dr. Robert Jenkins, the director of the Center for Slavic, Eurasian and East European Studies here at UNC, and myself will question and perhaps interrogate the ambassador about global affairs. After half an hour or so, we will open it to questions from you, the audience. Please feel encouraged to join in and ask lots of great and interesting questions. And subsequently, and here comes the best thing, subsequently there is a reception just outside this room. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the tremendous pleasure and great honor to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Olexander Motsyk and present him to you.
Professor Lares, thank you very much, first of all, for your very kind introduction and presentation. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be tonight with you in your very famous university, which is the first state university in the United States and which belongs to really leading universities of the world. If you don't mind, I will use my notes. And I would like to start saying that Ukraine is really interested in promoting deeply political, economic, cultural and scientific cooperation with North Carolina. I appreciate very much your interest in Ukraine. My country really deserves to be known better. While the suggested topic of this event was Ukraine in global politics, relations with Russia, Europe and the US, I believe I should start with a briefing about my country and its present policy. The national flag of my country is blue on the top of yellow. These colors are very common in Ukraine because they symbolize the blue color of our peaceful sky and well-known wheat harvest of our fertile black soil. Ukraine became independent when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. This dissolution started a period of transition to democracy and the market economy, which is still underway to some extent. Irrespectively of economy, Ukraine has had the best track record in democracy compared to other ex-Soviet republics. The current administration of President Viktor Yanukovych, elected in 2010, embarked on the ambitious program of reforms which has been taking place in 21 areas. The reforms will ensure maximum economic growth in our country. However, these reforms take place not at the expense of democratic reforms that the Ukrainian government continues to pursue. We fully share President Obama's position that democracy, more than any other form of government, delivers for citizens. In line with its European aspirations, Ukraine attaches paramount importance to strengthening their constitutional system, rule of law, and democratic institutions. In this context, I should mention the regular parliamentary elections, which will take place this month, to be exact, on the 28th of October. The elections will take place in accordance with a new electoral law supported by the overwhelming majority of parliamentarians, including by opposition parties. Combined with the long-awaited law on access to public information, these laws will ensure continued efficient functioning of democratic governance in Ukraine. As far as economic development is concerned, according to Human Development Index of the United Nations Development Programme, Ukraine is considered a high human developed country, ranking 76th globally and improving its rank by 3 positions last year. The World Bank ranks Ukraine 51st in the world by GDP. In 2011, our GDP grew by 5.2%, while inflation stood at record low 4.6%. This year, economic growth slowed down due to the global crisis. Nevertheless, unlike some European countries, we managed to continue our economic development, while inflation this year is record low again. Industrial, agricultural, resource, intellectual and human potential of Ukraine allows us to pursue the most ambitious goals in the economic sphere. Today, Ukraine is one of 10 largest food exporters in the world and is a contributor to UN World Food Program. As you may know, Ukraine is one of the world's largest producers and exporters of metallurgical and chemical products. Ukraine has all preconditions to become an economic powerhouse in Eastern Europe. For this, we should be we should use better our country's advantages, geographic location, rich natural resources, and educated workforce. Speaking about our foreign policy, European Union, Russia, and the United States represent our three main strategic partners. Relations with the European Union. Ukraine is geographically a part of Europe. Ukraine is the largest European country by territory, and it's fifth largest country by population. Ukraine is a successor of the old European state, Kievan Rus, which existed 1,000 years ago and was at that time the largest and the most powerful country in Europe. Ukraine, or rather Kievan Rus, was baptized in 1988, so is again one of the oldest Christian country in Europe. But unfortunately later on Ukraine, or Kievan Rus, lost its statehood as a result of the invasion from the east, and renewed its statehood 21 years ago after the dissolvement of the Soviet Union. That's why when saying about our future, we say that Ukraine is a European country, not only by geographical terms, but also by its culture, by its history, but by its traditions. And our place, we say, is among the European Union nations. So immediately after independence, we proclaimed that the most priority task of our foreign policy is integration into European Union. And for these 21 years, we really went a very long road. Still, we are not, I cannot say that we are next door to European Union by our integration, but nevertheless we did really great progress, and today we are at the stage that Ukraine completed the negotiations with the European Union on political associations and free trade zone agreement. Last year we approved together with the European the text in general of that agreement, and this year, last March, both sides initiated the agreement. The agreement by itself is really a huge step forward in our integration into European Union. It sets a number of tasks for Ukraine, which Ukraine should fulfill in order to become closer to Brussels. The free trade agreement is a typical free trade agreement of, is even not typical free trade agreement of European Union with non-EU member states. It goes far more, and when coming in force, it will be a very efficient instrument in our economic cooperation and economic integration into the European Union. So once more, relations with the European Union and strategic partnership with the European Union and integration as a purpose to the European Union is a #1 priority of Ukrainian foreign policy. On Ukrainian-Russian relations, because of history, geography and economy, Russia has been and will remain to be our strategic partner. While let's say that it's not easy to dance with the beer, in 2 decades of our independence we've learned most of the moves of the dance. Nowadays, I can say it very clearly that relations with Russia are based primarily on mutual economic and humanitarian interests, with maximum limitation of political influence on booming bilateral trade. From the political viewpoint, the trust between the leadership of two countries has been restored. Having proclaimed its non-bloc status, Ukraine continues its beneficial cooperation with NATO, and our course of European integration remains unchanged. We study the progress of Russia-led custom union and are ready for sector-based cooperation with Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, where it may benefit all sides. That is not to say that our relations with the eastern neighbor are completely cloudless. The biggest problem remains the inflated price of natural gas we have to pay under the contract signed by previous government. I can say that this price for Ukraine, for Russian gas, is the highest in Europe. Just as an example, to compare with the prices of gas on gas in the United States, Ukraine pays more than $500 per 1,000 cubic meters, and the United States, the price of gas of 1,000 cubic meters is something like $95. You can imagine what price we pay for gas for our industry and population. I think, however, that there is enough goodwill between Ukraine and Russia to resolve any issues. Here I turn to my favorite topic, which is the Ukraine-US relations. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Ukraine-US diplomatic relations, and the USA has been a very important and sometimes crucial ally of Ukraine. The US supports Ukraine's statehood in the most decisive way. We appreciate the US position as a guarantee of the Ukrainian independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of borders. The United States helped to build a free market in Ukraine. I can but mention the US assistance in implementing democracy-related reforms in Ukraine. In turn, my country has also proven to be an effective partner of the United States, both bilaterally and internationally. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the newly independent Ukraine had on its territory what was the third largest strategic nuclear weapons arsenal in the world. It was larger than that of Britain, France, and China combined. Between March 1994 and June 1996, almost 2,000 nuclear munitions of strategic weapon systems were removed from Ukraine, following 2,500 tactical nuclear munitions, which were removed before that. We gave it up, and by doing this, we contributed to help shape a new international order, more peaceful, stable, and hopeful in the aftermath of the Cold War. We are the only non-NATO country that participates in NATO-led peacekeeping and security operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, and the Mediterranean. Actually, while being a non-bloc country, we've raised our cooperation with NATO to unprecedented levels. On April 4, 2005, the presidents of Ukraine and the United States, with their joint statement, upgraded our relations to the level of strategic partnership. In December 2008, a key document, the Charter on Strategic Partnership, was signed. In order to realize better the Ukraine-US cooperation potential, we have a set of bilateral mechanisms. The key mechanism is the Commission on Strategic Partnership, co-chaired by Secretary Clinton and Ukraine's Foreign Minister Rishenko. The Commission coordinates both countries' activities in areas of interest. On the economic front, as Ukraine and the United States recover from the economic crisis, bilateral trade turnover showed a significant growth. In 2011, it grew by 47% and exceeded 3.5 billion, which is not a bad figure for Ukraine, but at the same time, the bilateral potential of Ukraine and the United States is much more bigger. More than 1,500 companies with the US capital are working at the Ukrainian market. The US is among the 10 largest investors in our country. US direct investment in the Ukrainian economy is over $1 billion US. The American investors are mostly interested in agriculture, energy, trade, and financial sectors. In the energy sphere, we need US technologies and investment to produce oil and gas in Ukraine using efficient modern methods such as offshore, shale, and coal gas production. To this end, we invited such American multinationals as Chevron and ExxonMobil to Ukraine's market, and now they launch their operations to produce shale gas and explore Black Sea continental shelf using their state-of-the-art technologies. This insight into Ukraine would not be complete if I didn't mention the role of Ukrainian Americans that have always contributed to developing friendly ties among our two nations. According to US Census estimates, in 2006 there were over 960,000 Americans of Ukrainian descent, representing 0.33% of American population. The Ukrainian population of the United States is the third largest outside Ukraine. Only Russia and Canada have larger Ukrainian communities. Тому, якщо в залі є тут представники української діаспори, то я хотів би через вас подякувати всім українцям Америки, американським громадянам, які своєю працею возвеличили авторитет українців у світі і які допомагали в розбудові українсько-американських відносин і роблять це зараз з честю. The fact about Ukraine that I have presented today are just part of strength, beauty, and perspective my country possesses. We Ukrainians have chosen the track that has been successful for the US and led the country to democracy and economic prosperity. We believe that the rapprochement between our two states has great potential for further progress and beneficial development. By saying this, I'd like to complete my presentation and give the floor to distinguished academics present here, I suppose, for further discussion. But before I do so, I hope that my visit will result in more Ukrainian study at your university, more scientific exchanges, and more research projects focused on Ukraine. I view your presence here as a promising guarantee of that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed.
It was a very interesting talk. Take a... Yeah, thanks again. It was a great pleasure to listen to you. We will now interrogate the ambassador with some interesting questions, and then we'll open it up to you, the audience. I would like to welcome my colleague, Dr. Robert Jenkins here. And maybe I'll just go ahead with asking you the first question. It's, you know, we are in a private environment here. And let me ask you a private question.
There are only 3 cameras.
We'll just ignore the camera. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, as we know, and gained independence soon after the end of the Cold War. And Russia really is a major problem for Ukraine, isn't it? Be honest. You're not speechless, are you?
Frankly speaking, Russia, first of all, is neighbor of Ukraine. And our approach is that we really wish to have friendly, neighborly relations with our big neighbor. During our independence, there were different periods of times, but today I can say that we are doing both sides everything possible in order to have really good relations. Russia is really close to Ukraine and Ukraine to Russia because of common centuries of common history, because of traditions, because of language, and so on and so forth. At the same time, our approach is to have good neighborly relations on the basis of mutual interest and on the basis of the principle of sovereign equality of both sides. Russia is very important for us economically. 1/3 of Ukrainian trade is oriented towards Russia, and we are very much dependent on gas delivery to Ukraine, and I mentioned this during my speech. So we are optimistic about our future, our relations, and one very important thing which I would like to add is that good relations with Russia makes our European integration perspectives strong.
Thank you very much. Bob, do you want to go?
Yeah, let me begin by, first of all, thanking the ambassador for taking time out of his busy schedule to come down here, and to Professor Laris for inviting me to take part in this venue today. I wanted to pick up on a comment that you made during your presentation about the relationship with the United States. You said the United States guarantees the territorial integrity and sovereignty of your country. And I want to push you a little bit on that. I'm curious in what way you think that happens. And we saw in 2008 when the territorial integrity of one of the other neighbors of Russia was challenged, that the United States wasn't capable of doing anything to defend the territorial integrity. And so in what sense do you use those terms, and what challenges do you see in that relationship?
Well, the relations of Ukraine with the United States is really very important for us, and we highly appreciate the strategic character of those relations. I mentioned during my speech that Ukraine possessed, at the beginning of its independence, the 3rd biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. And when giving up this arsenal, we agreed with the United States and with some other countries, members of the Security Council, about their guarantees to Ukrainian independence and Ukrainian sovereignty. And the United States is one of those guarantees. So we highly appreciate that position, and we think that this position will be preserved in the future.
Thank you. the moment, Europe is in deep crisis, we can say. Economic crisis, but also maybe still some sort of identity crisis. And Ukraine has the ambition to eventually become a member of the EU. Has the current crisis and sometimes mess and turmoil on the European continent influenced that? Has Ukraine having second thoughts about that?
To be honest, there are some experts, some politicians who really say in Ukraine that Europe is in trouble, so we maybe have to slow down our wish to become a member of European community. But the majority of population of the country still strongly supports the integration. That's why I don't think that the crisis in Europe, economic crisis and financial crisis, has a great deal of influence on Ukrainian opinion about the integration to the European Union.
Along that same line, Mr. Ambassador, what are the incentives for the Ukrainian political elite to introduce reforms that are necessary to go down the European Union path?
Well, first of all, we are doing reforms not for the European Union, not for the United States, but for Ukraine and for Ukrainian population. People in Ukraine really would like to live the life that population in the European Union lives. That means high standard of life from the economic point of view and from the point of view of democratic terms. Our striving to become a member of the European Union means that we want to create European Union, first of all, in our country, and then approach the European Union and say that if you are ready, we're ready, and let's Ukraine become a member of the European Union.
Thanks very much. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, so initially I believe it had ambitions to become a member of NATO, but Russia and the influence of Russia may make that complex and difficult. But still, Ukraine has troops in Afghanistan. Why felt Ukraine it necessary to send troops to Afghanistan? Was that as a kind of favor to the United States, as a favor to the West, that Ukraine sees itself part of the West, or have there been other reasons for that?
Well, first of all, about Ukraine and NATO relationship. Yes, in the past, the previous governments stood for membership in NATO, but the reality is that the majority of the Ukrainian population, for the time being, does not support the membership. Maybe something like one third supports, maybe just a bit more, but not definitely the majority. And that's why what we need to simply work to disseminate information, what NATO is, that this is a security and stability alliance, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, today, Ukraine has much more broader and deeper cooperation with NATO than it had during the previous governments. And our cooperation is really, if I may say, flourishing. And this is two-way cooperation. We need NATO as an alliance which guarantees, I would say, stability and security in the world. And on the other hand, NATO needs Ukraine because Ukraine is a strategically very important country in Eastern Europe and in Europe in general, and Ukraine really contributes greatly to European stability and security. And as far as our participation in peacekeeping operation in NATO, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Kosovo, and other regions of the world, well, we are a member of international community. We're a member of the United Nations, and in accordance with Charter of the United Nations, we have rights, but we have also obligation to support international peace and security. That's why we widely participate in peacekeeping operations and in other efforts together with international society, together with international community to, for example, fight against international terrorism, piracy, organized crimes, cyber terrorism, illicit trafficking in drugs, trafficking in people, and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, as you know, many commentators have pointed to the criminal procedure and sentencing of former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko as being an obstacle toward progress on EU negotiations. Could you assess whether that has in fact been the case, and also comment on what other obstacles there might be facing Ukraine in the EU and broader, perhaps, Euro-Atlantic integration process?
Well, I mentioned during my speech that previous government signed very disadvantageous contract, gas contract with Russia, and this contract really is a very big problem for Ukrainian economy for today. And this contract was signed in violation of Ukrainian legislation. That's why we now have this problem in this case. We would wish that this case would not affect the Ukrainian European integration. There is a will of majority of people of Ukraine to join European Union, and there is almost unanimous support in Ukrainian society on the part of almost all political parties, except maybe Communist Party. So I think that it would be not good to make some, let's say, to make some connection between this case and integration of Ukraine to the European Union.
Thank you. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened on Ukrainian soil, though it was still at that time the Soviet Union. Still, it was, of course, in the Ukraine it happened. We recently had the Japanese nuclear disaster. So my question would be, what is the attitude of the Ukrainian people and the government towards nuclear energy? What is the energy situation in the Ukraine? And what about Ukraine's pipeline diplomacy? Can you enlighten us about that?
Maybe starting from the very end. Pipeline diplomacy. Ukraine possesses a unique gas transport and oil transport system. It is property of Ukrainian people, of Ukrainian state. For the time it is not privatized, and our approach is to use this system in the interests of Ukraine, of Russia, and of European Union. So we propose to consider the, let's say, the participation on three sides in the establishing a kind of consortium that on the understanding that 1/3 would belong to European Union, 1/3 rights, I mean property rights to Russia, and 1/3 plus one voice, or 30, maybe 34% to Ukraine, and we can use it in interest of all three parties. But we definitely are against the, let's say, privatization of this gas transport system, but by one side. And I mean by our eastern neighbor. As far as the beginning of your question is concerned, sorry, would you remind?
I refer to the Chernobyl nuclear disaster and how that, what is the lasting legacy in Ukraine?
Yeah, Chernobyl nuclear disaster is the worst disaster ever happened on this planet, and Ukraine suffered really terribly. But nevertheless, we understand that nuclear energy should have a future. For the time being, more than 50% of electricity in Ukraine are produced at the nuclear power stations, and we are going to continue to use nuclear power.
Are these power stations safer than the ones in Japan?
Much. In Japan, I cannot compare with Japan.
Well, the recent nuclear disaster happened in Japan as well.
I can compare with Chernobyl and can definitely say that much more safer. As far as Japan is concerned, Japan possesses the nuclear power station with the highest possible level of security and safety, but we all know that it was because of the Fukushima accident, because of the earthquake and tsunami. That's why in the future mankind should think how to avoid any problem with the nuclear power stations.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, your expertise clearly is in international affairs, but I would like for you to tell the audience a bit about some internal affairs in Ukraine. Anyone who looks at election results over the last decade sees a very clear division between West and East in terms of support for political parties in Ukraine. And that raises the question about what is national identity in Ukraine. Is there a singular identity? Are there multiple identities? The recent language law institutionalizes Russian as an official language in Ukraine. Is there a future of a singular Ukrainian identity, or will it be a multi-ethnic, multinational country, in your opinion?
First of all, we have one identity. This is Ukrainian identity. Maybe like in the United States, we have maybe just a bit stronger, but anyway, we have division of regions which support, let's say, party of region and which support opposition parties. Like in the United States, 80% of electorate is divided between Democrats and Republicans, and only 20% these are electorate which will be deciding during the future election. The same in Ukraine. If you take eastern part, majority supports region party. If you take western part, majority supports today's opposition parties. But I think that the problem of dividing country into parts is exaggerated. We have one identity, but at the same time, in Ukraine, we respect rights of other ethnic groups and other languages, and I can assure you that there is no problem for Russian language or with Russian language in Ukraine.
Thank you. So far, I notice you haven't really given away any state secrets. We are still waiting. Let me ask you, are you enjoying Washington, D.C.?
Sorry?
Are you enjoying to live in Washington?
Very much.
Good. But my question
is a state secret.
No, not yet. But my question would be, the traditional role of an ambassador is supposed to have become less important than it was in the past. Now prime ministers and presidents seem to telephone each other rather than going through the ambassador. Is that true? And if that is true, what is your role?
My role as ambassador, as a head of embassy, is to strengthen already existing bridges and build new bridges. In general sense, that means to help to develop relations between two countries in every possible area, in economy, in political contacts, in culture, education, science, and so on and so forth. Yes, that's true that in the past the role of ambassador was bigger and stronger because of the problem of communication, and now the diplomacy is not only classical diplomacy, but as you mentioned, head of state can pick up a phone and call to his colleagues. But nevertheless, the role of embassies or ambassadors is still very high. Believe me, that's true. And that is the case.
Obviously, you don't want to talk yourself out of a job, I take.
Well, obviously, he has an important role of coming to the University of North Carolina. Absolutely. Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned the upcoming elections on October 28th. Could you give us some idea what the major themes of the campaign have been, and in particular, does foreign policy play any role in the parliamentary campaign?
Well, yes, we are at the eve of parliamentary elections. Like in the United States, maybe the very important subject is economy, jobs, employment. But maybe the role of foreign policy is just bigger than here in the United States. It's not as important maybe as internal policy, but nevertheless it's quite important.
And what are the important elements in foreign policy?
Well, the important elements are relations with European Union, with Russia, with the United States, with our closest neighbors like Poland, like Belarus, like Hungary, Slovakia, and Turkey, with countries, big players in Europe like Germany, France, United Kingdom, with countries like China, India, Brazil, South Korea, Japan, definitely. So we live in the global world, so we every let's say piece of relations is very important for us.
And among the major parties, would we be able to identify differences on these foreign policy questions?
Yes, there are some differences, but except maybe Communist Party, they are not so big one.
You mentioned in your remarks that Ukraine, like most countries in the world, has also or is still suffering from the global economic and financial crisis. As you know, the recipes for overcoming the crisis differ widely within the West. Stimulus in the United States, austerity in Europe. What is the Ukraine's recipe for getting out of it? And can you recommend anything to either President Obama or Angela Merkel in Germany?
I'm sure that President Obama and Chancellor Merkel are very experienced politicians, so they simply do not accept my advice. But what would be the advice for Ukraine? Simply to spend what we earn or produce, not more. That means that there should be very strict budget policy. There should be good business climate, investment climate, in order to invite foreign investors. There should be wise policy with regard to Ukrainian export. And we are in favor of further liberalization of world trade.
Thank you. But what about deficit spending and stimulus programs? Wouldn't that be something for the Ukraine as well?
Like other European countries, we have to have such stimulus programs, and we have to encourage not overspending the resources in order not to create problems.
Thank you very much. I think we have almost exhausted our questions here. Thank you very much for your interesting answers. I would like to open it to the audience, and if any one of you has a question, then please raise your hand. Keep it short and brief so that everyone has a chance. Can I encourage? There's a hand over there, please.
Yes.
We have a microphone going around there. Can you just hold on a minute, please? There it is.
During your talk, you were mentioning about how you have contracts, I believe it was natural gas with Russia, and they're very exorbitant. Is that correct?
Sorry?
Natural gas is very, and as you mentioned also, in the United States, natural gas is very inexpensive. If we do develop technology, we're actually working on it, to export natural gas to the Ukraine, how will that work with your contracts with Russia? I mean, can you stop buying natural gas from them and just start buying from the United States? And how will that affect your relationship with Russia?
We really are decreasing in our purchases of Russian gas. We buy today, it's less than we used to buy it last year. This year, for example, we're going to buy something like 28 billion cubic meters. And according to contract, we have to buy every year almost 50 billion cubic meters. And we will continue to buy less because the prices are very high and we cannot afford, because such process will ruin Ukrainian economy. So we're interested in buying gas anywhere from any sources, including from the United States. And Russia understands, it seems to me, that for us it's almost inadmissible to buy gas on such high prices, because it really creates a problem for the Ukrainian economy.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, please, the gentleman in the middle.
I noticed towards the end of your speech you spoke briefly in Ukrainian. However, during my time in Ukraine, I found that there were many people, both children and adults, who did not speak Ukrainian. They spoke only Russian. And I was wondering if you could comment very briefly on whether you think the lack of Ukrainian in some areas and the new promotion of the Russian language would present any problems moving forward, both internally in Ukraine and internationally.
So in Ukraine we have only one state language, it is Ukrainian language. So this language it is being taught in every Ukrainian school and in universities. That's why, well, I don't think that we will have some problems with Ukrainian language in the future. Once more, this is the only state language. Yes, for example, Russian language is used more frequently in eastern part of Ukraine and in Crimea, and this is a part of our history, we understand that. But nevertheless, once more, there is only one state language in Ukraine, it's Ukrainian language.
Thank you. Ukrainian is simply too difficult, I think. Anyone here? Yeah? No? Yes, please. Can we have the mic? That's the microphone, please.
Since you didn't mention Republic of Moldova as one of your neighbors, I was wondering what's Ukraine's position on the fact that the 14th Russian army is stationed very close to your western borders, and is Ukraine interested in solving the Transnistrian conflict that's also very close to the borders of Ukraine? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for an interesting question. Some time ago I was involved as the Ukrainian negotiator to this issue. So on the initiative of Ukraine we established a new format of negotiations, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, 5+2, including European Union and the United States. Ukraine is interested very much in solving the Transnistria problem. Our position is that we respect independence and territorial integrity of Moldova with a broad Transnistria autonomy as a part of Moldova.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, please. We'll keep you fit.
My name is Valentin Ionin and I'm from Romania and I'm doing my master's in Russian European Studies. And 2 months ago, Ukraine passed a law which allows the use of Ukrainian minorities' use of their native language in official affairs. And I was surprised to see that both Romanian and Moldovan language are seen as 2 different languages by the Ukrainian officials. And in Romania, as well as in the Republic of Moldova, this law is seen as some people see it as a Soviet reminiscence, while others consider it as a strategy of the Ukrainian government to divide the community. What is your opinion?
My opinion is very clear. If there are people who wish to be called as Romanian, we say, okay, it's your right. If there are people who wish to be called Moldovan, it's okay, it's their right. We cannot force Moldovan to call themselves Romanian, and vice versa.
I'm talking about the language.
Yeah, and language as well. If Moldova considers that this is Moldovan language, let it be. We cannot say that in Chisinau you don't have Moldovan language but Romanian language, because I don't know why. So we respect the approach of Chisinau and Bucharest. Bucharest say that Romanian language in Romania, Chisinau says that Moldovan language
some of the people in Chisinau, not the whole Chisinau.
Well, it's internal issue of Moldova, but we communicate with Moldovan capital, with Moldova as a state. That is our approach. But we be sure that we want to have very good relations with our good friend Romania and with our good friend Moldova. And for me, it's especially important because I was chief Ukrainian negotiator on the border with Romania. in 2003, on the 17th of June, you might know we signed an agreement.
In 1997 was the first time when...
Sorry?
In 1997, Romania signed the agreement.
No, it's political. It is political. I negotiated with the Romanian team at that time, headed by, at that time, Foreign Minister Nestas. And later on, in 2003, we signed an agreement on border between Ukraine and Romania, and we solved this issue according to the best European standards. And we also have agreement, border agreement with Romania, and I was happy also to negotiate that agreement. So we would like to have excellent relations with both countries.
Thank you. You were also...
We have them.
You were also ambassador to Turkey, and the situation in Syria is becoming ever more both bloody and ruthless and difficult and complex in international context. So should the international community eventually do something about Syria? Is that possible at all? And you see a role, maybe a mediation role for Ukraine regarding Russia? What is your opinion?
Well, it's a tragedy for people of Syria, and definitely our approach is that peace and stability come to this country. We, as a part of international society, support the position of international, as a part of international community, support the position of international community on this issue, especially of the United Nations.
So basically, we are not doing anything so for the time being. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, the negotiations are going on with all interested parties, including with the United States, and let's hope that this issue will be solved.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, the gentleman over there.
Yes, thank you. You explained that the economic depression in Ukraine wasn't as bad as much of Europe, at least in the recent years, but the depression in much of Europe has caused polarizations in many countries, and radical communist and frequently even fascist parties have managed to gain seats in national parliaments and even in the European Parliament. Has this polarization of politics and society taken place in Ukraine as well? And if yes, to what extent? And how might this affect the foreign policy or foreign relations and EU accessions?
I do not think that we have some kind of polarization in Ukraine. And, as in any country or in any society, we have different points of view, different positions of different political parties, but in general I do not see any problem of some drastic polarization and coming to parliament some extremists and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Yes, the gentleman over here.
Hi, I'm interested in your role as the ambassador in the United States, and particularly the bridges that you're building in promoting Ukrainian culture. Many foreign countries have set up centers like the Goethe House. Is Ukraine considering setting something up in the United States like a Shevchenko House?
Yeah, we have been considering opening a cultural center. And we will be happy to open cultural center not only in Washington or New York, but as well in Chicago, in San Francisco, and in other cities. The only restraint is financial situation, which does not permit for the time being to spend money on opening, which we really do not have for the time being. But in the future, we are interested very much in open cultural centers in all major cities of the United States, especially where there is a big Ukrainian diaspora.
Thank you. We would all like to be invited to the opening party. Thank you. Any more? Yes, please.
Could you talk a little bit about the social and economic effects in the wake of hosting the soccer championship this summer and how that's affected Ukraine's view in the international community?
Yeah, maybe not everybody knows Ukraine had a great event during the last summer. It was European Football Championship, the first time ever hosted by Ukraine. And what is really fantastic, that we managed to organize it together with Poland in the best possible way. And the best words were told by President of Mr. Michel Platini, who said that Ukraine did a fantastic job, and that by hosting this European Football Cup and by organization of this European Cup and by constructing infrastructure, Ukraine moved forward 30 years in advance. So everybody was happy, all guests were happy, hosts were happy. So that was really a fantastic football championship, and it really brought Ukraine much more closer to the European Union in particular.
Thank you. Thank you. The only problem was, of course, that the wrong team won the championship. Any more questions, please? Yes, over there.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned the importance of democracy and free market economy and economical and social development, and as well your role as inside of Ukraine, but also around the world. Therefore, I wonder, how do you view the undemocratic development in Russia, which had elections which again were typical of fraud, parties are not allowed to take part, and opposition leaders have been expelled out of parliament, and we can see a rising of demonstrations. And also the gas companies that you mentioned has certain constraints on your relationship. It's also controlled by regime people with the inside of the government. So how do you view this, and in which ways does this constrain democracy development with the inside of Ukraine? Thank you.
Well, maybe it will be not very polite and correct for me to comment the situation in Russia. We in Ukraine, we wish Russian people, we wish Russia all the best, we wish prosperity, and we once more are very much interested in friendly and good neighborly relations with our eastern neighbor. Thank you.
This is a very diplomatic answer. So feel free to just talk your mind. Any more questions? Yes, the lady over there.
Hi, my name is Karina. I wanted to ask you, as I know lately, Ukrainian parliament approved in first hearing the ban on homosexual propaganda. And I wonder, how do you think it will affect the freedom of speech in Ukraine and in general the human rights issue? And whether it means that Oscar Wilde, for example, will be prohibited to teach in school, or what does it mean, the homosexual propaganda in general? Thank you.
Because we have free discussions in our society and there is no closed topics, I think that by this Ukraine demonstrates that it is a democratic country. I cannot say that we are perfect in democracy, but what is true, we are on the way, and step by step, with every day, we continue to strengthen democratic cause in Ukraine. As far as this issue is concerned, there are people in Ukraine who are in favor, there are people in Ukraine who are against. This is the situation in general.
Thank you. Any more questions? And let me briefly ask you another question. You know, there was the establishment of a missile shield in Eastern Europe recently by the United States. It's kind of controversial among some countries. Some countries want it. Do we need such a missile shield? Is it really necessary? Does it protect us from Russia or from Iran, or what is the matter?
Well, my answer would be that Ukraine is interested in further strengthening of security in Europe and throughout the world. So, what is good for security support? Whether the anti-missile system is good or bad, still the discussions are going on, and well, after elections we will see what the situation will develop further.
I think we agree with you. We all want security and peace for the entire world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for a very good talk and very interesting discussion. Thanks for coming.